Welcome back to Real Life of Animals. What you are about to hear is not fiction. These are real anaconda encounters taken from documented incidents, survivor reports, and regional records. Only the names have been changed for safety. In the flooded forests of South America, there are places where land disappears, visibility drops to zero, and you are never truly alone. People step into the water believing they are safe, and seconds later they are gone. These 8 stories reveal what happens when humans enter territory ruled by a predator that doesn't chase, doesn't roar, doesn't warn. If you're new here, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because every story on this channel is real, disturbing, and based on true events. Let's begin. Story 1. The river had always been part of daily life in this region of the Brazilian Amazon. It provided food, transportation, and a sense of rhythm that governed when people worked, rested, and moved through the jungle. For decades, nothing about the river had changed in a way that truly frightened the local communities. That sense of familiarity is what made the incident so devastating. The area was deep within a lowland rainforest zone where seasonal flooding blurred the boundaries between land and water. During the rainy months, entire sections of forest became submerged, creating shallow waterways that stretched for kilometers. These flooded forests were not empty. They were alive, and they belonged to predators perfectly adapted to hunt within them. The man at the center of this incident had lived near the river since childhood. He worked transporting supplies between isolated settlements, navigating narrow channels that larger boats could not access. He knew how to read currents, how to avoid submerged logs, and how to recognize the signs of dangerous wildlife. At least he believed he did. On the morning it happened, the water level was unusually high. Recent storms upstream had sent additional runoff into the river system, darkening the water and carrying debris into areas that were usually clear. Visibility was almost non-existent. The surface looked calm, but beneath it the environment had changed completely. As he guided his small motorized canoe along a flooded forest corridor, the engine stalled. This was not uncommon. Floating vegetation often clogged the intake. He cut the motor and stepped into the water to clear it, expecting the muddy riverbed beneath his feet. Instead, his leg brushed against something thick, muscular, and alive. Before he could react, the anaconda struck. The snake had been positioned along the submerged route for hours, perhaps longer. Flooded forests give anacondas access to hunting grounds that are normally unreachable, allowing them to ambush large prey with minimal effort. This one was massive, its body hidden perfectly among submerged roots and branches. In a single explosive movement, the anaconda wrapped around his lower body, pulling him off balance. The force was overwhelming. He fell sideways into deeper water as additional coils secured his torso and arms. The constriction began immediately. Anacondas do not crush bones instantly, they tighten slowly, responding to movement. Each attempt to struggle triggered more pressure. His chest compressed inward, preventing full breaths. Blood flow to his extremities slowed rapidly, causing weakness and disorientation. Water filled his mouth as he tried to surface. The canoe drifted away, bumping softly against branches as the jungle absorbed the struggle. There were no screams. The pressure around his lungs made that impossible. The snake adjusted its coils with terrifying precision, tightening whenever the man attempted to move. Within minutes, resistance faded. The anaconda dragged its prey deeper into the flooded forest, disappearing beneath the murky surface. The river closed above them, erasing any sign that something violent had just occurred. When the canoe was found later that day, it was empty, engine damaged, supplies still on board. Search efforts began immediately, but the flooded forest offered no visibility and no trails to follow. Authorities searched for days, but the river had already reclaimed everything. Several kilometers downstream, villagers reported seeing a massive anaconda resting along a partially submerged log, its body unnaturally distended. By the time wildlife officials arrived, the snake had vanished back into the depths of the forest. No remains were ever recovered. The supply route through that flooded corridor was abandoned permanently. Locals began avoiding the area entirely, choosing longer, safer paths, even during dry seasons. Elders spoke quietly about the river changing, about something ancient reclaiming its territory. The jungle did not announce the danger. It simply reminded everyone who truly belonged there. Story 2. Several months after the first incident, the river system experienced another extreme flooding cycle. Seasonal rains arrived earlier than expected, swelling tributaries and forcing wildlife deeper into human-accessible zones. What had once been rare encounters between people and apex predators became increasingly frequent, but few understood just how much the balance had shifted beneath the water's surface. This time, the setting was a remote eco-research outpost positioned along a narrow bend of the river. The station had been established to study aquatic biodiversity during flood seasons, focusing on fish migration and plant dispersal. Ironically, the researchers underestimated the very predator that dominated these waters. The outpost relied on a floating platform connected to land by a narrow wooden walkway. During high water, the walkway submerged completely, forcing staff to move by wading through knee to waist-deep water. The team followed strict protocols, including daytime movement only and constant visual scanning. Still, the river did not follow human rules. One researcher was tasked with collecting sensor data from a submerged monitoring device positioned several meters away from the platform. The device had stopped transmitting overnight, likely due to debris damage. The retrieval was considered routine. The water appeared deceptively calm. Visibility was almost zero. Layers of sediment suspended in the floodwater created a thick, opaque environment. Sunlight barely penetrated below the surface, turning the submerged forest into a shadowed maze. Unbeknownst to the team, a large anaconda had established itself beneath the outpost weeks earlier. Flood conditions had expanded its territory, allowing it to remain close to human activity without being detected. The constant vibrations from generators and movement above had not scared it away. Instead, they had become part of the environment. As the researcher stepped off the platform and into deeper water, the snake reacted instantly. The initial strike was silent. The anaconda wrapped around the researcher's legs, pulling them downward with such force that balance was lost immediately. Water rushed over the shoulders as the snake coiled upward, securing the torso and pinning the arms against the body. The constriction was methodical. Each coil tightened in response to muscle movement. Attempts to push away only increased the pressure. The chest compressed inward, preventing proper breathing. Panic accelerated oxygen loss, weakening the body faster. Within seconds, the researcher was fully submerged. From the platform, other team members noticed movement in the water, but the murkiness prevented them from identifying the threat. By the time they realized something was wrong, the struggle had already been dragged beneath the surface. Emergency protocols were activated immediately. Equipment was dropped into the water in a desperate attempt to deter the predator. Loud vibrations, poles, and even small explosives were deployed, but the anaconda had already retreated into deeper flooded forest with its prey. Search operations continued for over a week. Drones scanned the flooded canopy. Divers attempted limited underwater sweeps but were forced to retreat due to visibility and safety concerns. The water hid everything. Eventually, the monitoring device was recovered several kilometers downstream, damaged and partially crushed. No other physical evidence was found. Environmental assessments later revealed a significant increase in large anaconda activity throughout the floodplain that season. The combination of rising water levels, habitat compression, and abundant prey had created ideal conditions for aggressive hunting behavior. The research outpost was permanently shut down. Reports from nearby communities described seeing massive serpentine shapes moving between trees during flood peaks, crossing areas once considered safe. Fishing routes were altered. Children were forbidden from entering the water entirely. The river had become something else, not louder, not more violent on the surface, just far more patient. Those who lived there understood one thing clearly. The danger was no longer rare. It was waiting just beneath the waterline, unseen and perfectly adapted to strike again. Story 3. The third incident occurred far from research stations and official reports. It unfolded in an area rarely mapped in detail, where the river fractured into countless channels and flooded forest extended for kilometers in every direction. Local communities depended on these waters for survival, navigating them daily with small wooden boats and instinct rather than technology. For generations, the people living there had respected the anaconda as a force of nature rather than a threat to be challenged. Encounters happened, but rarely ended in disaster. That balance, however, had begun to erode. Unusual heat had persisted for weeks, followed by sudden violent rainfall. The water rose rapidly, swallowing riverbanks, footpaths, and low-lying shelters. Entire sections of forest transformed into a continuous submerged landscape, erasing familiar boundaries. During this flood cycle, a group of workers traveled upriver to repair a damaged supply route. Their journey required passing through a narrow channel bordered by partially submerged trees. The passage was considered safe during normal conditions, but floodwater had altered its depth and current. As the boat entered the channel, the engine stalled. The sudden silence was unsettling. Efforts to restart the engine failed. With no current strong enough to carry them out quickly, the group decided to push the boat manually toward shallower ground. Water reached chest height, forcing slow and careful movement. None of them noticed the massive shape resting along the channel floor. The anaconda had positioned itself strategically, body aligned with the submerged roots and debris. Flood conditions allowed it to remain fully concealed, conserving energy while monitoring vibrations above. When one of the workers stepped closer to the riverbed, the snake surged upward. The strike was explosive. Water erupted as the anaconda latched onto the lower torso, dragging the victim beneath the surface with overwhelming force. The boat lurched violently, nearly capsizing as the remaining workers struggled to maintain balance. The anaconda coiled instantly, wrapping multiple times around the body and anchoring itself against submerged branches. The power of the constriction was undeniable. Movement slowed within moments. Attempts to intervene were chaotic and ineffective. Poles struck water and vegetation blindly. The flood-muted environment swallowed sound and visibility alike. Every second passed with increasing helplessness. The anaconda began to move. Using powerful lateral motion, it dragged its prey deeper into the flooded forest, navigating effortlessly through obstacles that hindered humans. The coils tightened incrementally, responding to resistance with crushing precision. Within minutes, the channel returned to stillness. The workers abandoned the boat and fled toward higher ground, disoriented and shaken. News of the incident spread rapidly through nearby communities, reinforcing long-held fears now intensified by recent events. Search efforts were brief and cautious. No one was willing to enter the water beyond necessity. The floodplain had become unpredictable, hiding dangers that could not be seen or avoided once engaged. Traditional fishing routes were abandoned entirely. Weeks later, after water levels receded slightly, signs of disturbance were discovered deep within the forest. Broken vegetation and drag marks indicated where the anaconda had traveled. The remains, partially obscured by debris and scavengers, confirmed what everyone already knew. Environmental observers later identified a troubling pattern. Anacondas were no longer avoiding human movement. Flood-driven habitat compression had forced both predator and people into overlapping spaces, increasing the frequency and intensity of encounters. The snakes had adapted faster. What once felt like isolated tragedies were becoming part of a broader shift. The river system was changing not just in shape, but in behavior. Predators moved with confidence through territories humans believed they controlled. Floodwater erased warnings, landmarks, and escape routes. The lesson was unmistakable. In these conditions, the anaconda did not need to hunt aggressively. It only needed to wait. The water would bring opportunity to it silently and inevitably. Story 4. The fourth incident unfolded along a remote tributary where the forest pressed tightly against the water, creating narrow corridors of shadow and silence. This area was known for its abundance of wildlife and minimal human presence, yet it had become a temporary settlement point for seasonal workers harvesting resources deeper in the jungle. Their camp was built on slightly elevated ground, close enough to the river to allow easy access for washing, fishing, and transport. At night, the forest came alive with sound, but no one considered it unusual. The river had always been part of their routine. What they did not account for was how drastically the environment had shifted. Extended rainfall upstream had slowed water flow, creating long stretches of stagnant, dark water beneath the canopy. Visibility was nearly non-existent below the surface. Floating debris formed natural cover for predators accustomed to ambush. The anaconda occupying this stretch of river had reached exceptional size. Its presence had gone unnoticed for months. It remained motionless for hours at a time, body aligned parallel to fallen trees and roots, blending perfectly into the submerged landscape. The snake's patience was absolute, its movements calculated only when success was certain. Late one afternoon, a worker entered the water alone. The river appeared calm, No ripples, no signs of disturbance. He waded in slowly, intending only to rinse equipment and cool off after hours in the heat. Water reached his waist, then his chest. He stayed close to the bank, believing that distance alone ensured safety. The anaconda responded instantly. From beneath the surface, the snake surged forward, striking with precision that allowed no reaction time. The initial grip locked around the upper thigh, pulling the body downward at an angle that destabilized balance completely. Water closed over the surface. The anaconda coiled rapidly, wrapping around the torso and one arm, compressing the chest with increasing force. Every movement from the victim triggered a tighter response. The snake anchored itself against submerged branches, leveraging its full mass. The struggle remained unseen from shore. By the time others noticed movement in the water, the surface had already returned to near stillness. Panic spread quickly as they rushed toward the river, but the dense vegetation and muddy banks slowed any effective response. Attempts to locate the exact point of attack failed. The water offered no clarity, only darkness and drifting debris. Entering the river was not an option. The risk was immediate and undeniable. The anaconda moved deeper into cover. Using the river's edge and submerged roots, it dragged its prey beneath overhanging vegetation, disappearing entirely from view. The forest swallowed the disturbance, leaving behind only faint ripples and broken leaves. As night fell, the camp fell silent. Search efforts were delayed until daylight, but even then no one entered the water beyond knee depth. Long poles were used to probe blindly, but nothing surfaced. The anaconda had already retreated to deeper, safer territory. Days later, evidence appeared downstream. Disturbed sediment and crushed vegetation suggested a powerful movement along the riverbed. The remains were eventually discovered lodged among branches where water flow slowed. The condition confirmed what experts already feared. The anaconda had not acted defensively. It had hunted deliberately. Environmental assessments later revealed a significant decline in prey availability in the region. Flood cycles and human expansion had reduced the anaconda's traditional food sources, forcing it to adapt its hunting strategy. Humans had become part of the pattern. The incident triggered a shift in behavior across nearby settlements. Camps were relocated farther from water, night access was restricted, and river activity was limited to groups rather than individuals. Yet despite these precautions, the sense of security never fully returned. The river no longer felt neutral. It felt occupied. The anaconda's presence transformed the environment into a space governed by patience and concealment. Movement alone was no longer enough to signal danger. Silence had become the most dangerous condition of all. The forest had not changed its nature. Humans had simply moved closer to its center. Story 5. The fifth incident occurred far from any established settlement, deep within a region of flooded forest where land and water merged into a single shifting landscape. Seasonal flooding had transformed dry paths into narrow channels, forcing travelers to rely on small boats to navigate between scattered high-ground clearings. This environment favored the anaconda completely. The river here moved slowly, heavy with sediment, its surface broken only by drifting vegetation and fallen branches. Sunlight barely penetrated the canopy above, leaving the water in a constant state of dim reflection. Depth varied unpredictably, creating sudden drop-offs hidden beneath floating debris. A research team entered the area to document wildlife movement following recent floods. They were experienced, cautious, and familiar with the risks. Their route followed a narrow channel that cut between thick walls of submerged forest, where trees rose directly out of the water. Progress was slow. The boat's motor remained off to reduce noise and paddles were used instead. Each stroke sent small ripples outward, disturbing the surface just enough to mask what lay beneath. The team believed silence gave them control. They were wrong. Beneath the boat, stretched along the channel floor, lay an anaconda of extraordinary length. Its body followed the natural curve of the waterway, aligned perfectly with submerged roots and fallen trunks. From above, it was indistinguishable from the environment. The anaconda had already assessed the situation. It sensed vibration, pressure changes, and movement patterns. The boat passed directly over its midsection, close enough that the snake adjusted its position slightly, coiling against a submerged tree to anchor itself. The strike was sudden and violent. The anaconda surged upward, colliding with the side of the boat and wrapping part of its body around the hull. The impact destabilized the vessel instantly, throwing one person into the water while the others struggled to maintain balance. The water erupted. The anaconda released the boat and redirected its full force toward the fallen individual. Within seconds, its coils wrapped around the torso and legs, pulling downward with immense strength. The victim disappeared beneath the surface almost immediately. Panic overtook the remaining team members. They attempted to maneuver the boat closer, but the narrow channel and surrounding trees limited movement. Paddles struck water blindly, creating splashes that obscured visibility even further. The anaconda tightened its grip. Constriction followed a precise rhythm, each contraction reducing the victim's ability to resist. The snake used the channel's depth and structure to its advantage, pressing the body against submerged roots to prevent escape. The struggle lasted less than a minute. Then the water grew still. The anaconda did not surface again. It dragged its prey deeper into the flooded forest, using the interconnected waterways to vanish beyond reach. No amount of searching revealed its path. The environment itself concealed the outcome. Hours later, as the team retreated, they noticed subtle disturbances along the water's edge. Bent reeds, displaced branches, and compressed vegetation marked the anaconda's route through the flooded forest. These signs continued for hundreds of meters before disappearing entirely. Recovery efforts were impossible. The area was declared unsafe and abandoned by the team. No further exploration was attempted. Satellite analysis later showed that the region had become a permanent floodplain, increasing the likelihood of similar encounters. Ecologists reviewing the incident concluded that the anaconda's behavior was not unusual. Flooding had expanded its hunting range, creating access to larger prey and reducing the need for prolonged pursuit. Boats, humans, and other unfamiliar shapes had become part of the environment, not obstacles but opportunities. The anaconda had adapted seamlessly. In flooded forests, visibility is irrelevant. Movement alone determines survival. The snake's ability to remain unseen, to wait indefinitely, and to strike with overwhelming force makes it the dominant presence in such environments. After the incident, restrictions were placed on travel through the region. Research shifted to aerial observation, and waterways once used as access routes were marked as exclusion zones. Yet the flooded forest remained unchanged. The water continued to rise and fall with the seasons. Trees remained half submerged, channels shifted, and visibility stayed poor. Somewhere beneath the surface, the anaconda continued its slow, deliberate existence, unaffected by the boundaries humans attempted to impose. The forest had claimed its territory completely, and in those waters the anaconda ruled without challenge. Story 6. The sixth incident unfolded along a remote tributary where the rainforest pressed tightly against the water, creating a narrow corridor of shadow and humidity. This river was rarely used, known only to local fishermen who navigated it cautiously and never alone. The water appeared calm, but beneath its surface lay deep pools formed by centuries of erosion. This was an ideal environment for an anaconda. The riverbank showed signs of recent activity. Mudslides from heavy rainfall had exposed roots and collapsed sections of shoreline, forcing boats closer to the center of the channel. Fallen trees formed natural barriers, narrowing passage and slowing movement. A small fishing group entered the tributary shortly before dusk. They had planned a short trip, intending to check nets placed earlier in the week. Experience made them confident, but familiarity often breeds carelessness. The river had never caused serious trouble before, and the evening light still allowed visibility. What they failed to notice was the waterline. Recent rains had raised the river just enough to flood a low section of forest, creating a hidden inlet branching off the main channel. This flooded area was dense with submerged vegetation and fallen branches, offering perfect concealment. The anaconda waited there. Its body lay partially coiled around submerged trunks, its head positioned just below the surface. From above, it appeared no different from drifting debris. Its breathing was slow and controlled, minimizing surface disturbance. As the boat passed, vibrations traveled through the water. The anaconda tracked them precisely, adjusting its posture without revealing its presence. The moment of attack was calculated, not rushed. The boat slowed near a cluster of fallen trees. One fisherman leaned over the side, reaching toward a net tangled beneath the surface. His balance shifted forward, placing his upper body dangerously close to the waterline. The anaconda struck. It launched upward with explosive force, seizing the fisherman's arm and shoulder in a single motion. The impact pulled him forward and out of the boat before anyone could react. Water surged violently as the snake wrapped its coils around his torso. The remaining fishermen shouted and attempted to grab him, but the anaconda's strength was overwhelming. The victim was dragged sideways into the flooded inlet, disappearing beneath the tangled vegetation. The boat rocked violently. Panic took over as paddles struck branches and roots, preventing pursuit. The narrow channel offered no space to maneuver, and the flooded forest swallowed both sound and movement. Underwater, the anaconda tightened its coils. Constriction was deliberate, each contraction cutting off breath and circulation. The snake anchored itself against submerged trees, using the environment to increase pressure. The victim's movements weakened rapidly. Within moments, resistance stopped. The anaconda remained submerged, holding its prey motionless until complete. Only then did it begin the slow process of repositioning, dragging the body deeper into the flooded forest where retrieval would be impossible. The fishermen waited in silence. They did not enter the inlet. Local knowledge told them what had happened and what entering would mean. After several minutes, they pulled away from the area, abandoning their nets and equipment. Search efforts began the following day. Authorities arrived by boat, but visibility was nearly zero. The flooded forest extended far beyond mapped boundaries, and water depth varied unpredictably. Divers were unable to operate safely due to submerged debris and low visibility. Tracks along the bank confirmed the presence of a large anaconda. Imprints showed where its body had pressed into the mud, leaving a clear path leading away from the main channel. The marks extended for over 100 meters before vanishing into deeper water. No remains were recovered. Environmental specialists later explained that flooding had altered the region's predator behavior. Anacondas expanded their hunting zones during seasonal floods, accessing new prey and exploiting confined waterways where escape was limited. Human activity had become increasingly frequent in these areas, unintentionally overlapping with the anaconda's expanded territory. The incident reinforced long-standing warnings. Flooded forests are not transitional spaces, but active ecosystems dominated by ambush predators. What appears navigable on the surface often conceals complex underwater structures designed by nature itself. In the weeks following the attack, the tributary was avoided entirely. Fishing routes were redirected and warning signs were placed along the main river. Locals spoke quietly of the incident, reinforcing rules passed down for generations. Avoid narrow channels at dusk, never lean over the water, and never assume stillness means safety. The anaconda remained unseen after that night, but the river continued to rise and fall, flooding the forest again and again. Each season reshaped the terrain, renewing the conditions that favored silent hunters beneath the surface. The environment did not change, and neither did the predator that ruled it. Story 7. The seventh incident occurred deep within a protected rainforest zone where river systems intersected with abandoned human infrastructure. Decades earlier, a small research outpost had operated in the area, studying wildlife migration patterns before funding was withdrawn, and the station was left to decay. What remained were collapsed walkways, rusted platforms, and partially submerged structures slowly being reclaimed by the jungle. This environment created an unnatural advantage for predators. Water levels fluctuated constantly due to seasonal rain, flooding old access paths and creating isolated pools connected by narrow channels. These pockets trapped fish, mammals, and occasionally humans who underestimated how quickly the terrain could change. An anaconda had established itself near the ruins, its body measured longer than the remaining wooden platform that once served as a docking area. Over time, algae and debris covered its scales, allowing it to blend seamlessly with submerged beams and fallen planks. The snake used the structure as a hunting ground, exploiting the artificial cover provided by human construction. A solo explorer entered the area during late afternoon. He was documenting abandoned sites for an environmental archive, traveling by inflatable raft. His plan involved photographing the remains of the outpost before sunset and exiting before darkness fell. Experience in remote environments made him confident, but this confidence relied heavily on visibility and stable ground. Both were disappearing. Recent rainfall had raised the waterline enough to submerge parts of the old platform. From a distance it appeared solid, but beneath the surface rot and collapse had weakened its support. The explorer anchored his raft nearby and stepped carefully onto what he believed was firm ground. The structure shifted. The sudden movement sent vibrations through the water, triggering an immediate response. The anaconda, coiled beneath the platform, reacted with speed that defied its size. It surged upward, wrapping around the explorer's lower body before he could retreat. The force snapped weakened planks. Both the man and sections of the platform collapsed into the water. The anaconda tightened instantly, using the sinking debris as leverage. The victim attempted to push free, but the submerged structure limited movement, trapping him between broken beams and coils. Water flooded his gear, dragging him lower. The anaconda adjusted its grip methodically, repositioning coils to restrict breathing. Each movement was controlled, conserving energy while maximizing pressure. The snake anchored itself against metal supports embedded in the riverbed, preventing escape. The struggle was brief. Within minutes, movement slowed and stopped. The anaconda remained submerged, holding position until all resistance ended. It then began the slow process of extraction, freeing itself from the collapsed structure while maintaining its hold. The body was pulled beneath the ruins. By nightfall, nothing remained at the surface except ripples and drifting debris. The raft detached and floated downstream, eventually becoming lodged against riverbank vegetation several kilometers away. Search teams were alerted the following morning. The abandoned outpost proved difficult to access. Overgrown paths and flooded terrain delayed arrival, and by the time authorities reached the site, water levels had risen further. Visibility was nearly non-existent. Divers found signs of disturbance. Collapsed beams showed fresh breakage, and drag marks extended into deeper water beyond the structure. Large-scale impressions in the mud indicated the movement of a massive snake through the area. Despite extensive searches, no remains were found. Environmental analysis later concluded that the abandoned structures unintentionally created ideal hunting environments for large reptiles. Artificial cover combined with natural flooding produced ambush zones far more dangerous than untouched forest. The outpost was officially declared off-limits. Warning markers were installed upstream, advising against navigation during high water seasons. Researchers emphasized that abandoned human infrastructure in wild environments does not disappear but transforms, often becoming tools for apex predators. The anaconda was never relocated. Removing it would have required draining sections of the river, an ecological disruption deemed too severe. Instead, authorities relied on restricted access and education to prevent further incidents. The ruins remain submerged most of the year. When water levels drop briefly, fragments of the platform emerge, weathered and silent. But beneath the surface, the environment remains unchanged, shaped by the same forces that claimed control long before humans arrived. The anaconda continues to patrol the area, invisible, patient, and perfectly adapted to a landscape where human presence has faded but its consequences remain. Story 8. The final incident took place in one of the most remote floodplain regions of the rainforest, an area rarely visited except by seasonal fishermen and illegal loggers moving quietly through the waterways. This region was shaped by slow-moving rivers that expanded dramatically during the rainy season, transforming solid ground into an endless network of shallow lakes, submerged trees, and floating vegetation. Here, boundaries between land and water did not exist. During peak flooding, entire forests stood half-submerged for weeks at a time. Tree trunks disappeared beneath dark water, and only the upper canopy remained visible. Beneath the surface, roots, branches, and fallen debris formed a dense, chaotic maze where visibility dropped to zero within seconds. An anaconda dominated this environment. Its territory stretched across multiple kilometers of flooded forest, moving freely between channels without ever fully exposing itself. Locals knew of its presence through indirect signs: missing dogs, overturned canoes, and unusual disturbances in fish populations. No one had ever seen the snake fully out of the water. A small group entered the region despite warnings. They were part of an unauthorized logging operation using temporary camps and floating platforms to extract valuable hardwood trees during the flood season, when access by water made transport easier. Their operation relied on silence and speed, minimizing time spent in any one location. The camp was established on a floating structure anchored between several trees. The platform rose and fell with the water level, appearing stable but constantly shifting. Waste was discarded directly into the water, attracting fish and smaller animals. This activity unintentionally created a concentrated food zone, drawing predators closer over time. The anaconda observed patiently. For days it remained beneath the platform, coiled around submerged roots and support ropes. Its body moved only when necessary, conserving energy while learning the rhythm of human activity above. It adapted its position as water levels changed, never surfacing. The incident occurred shortly before dawn. One worker stepped off the platform to check a net placed nearby, wading into chest-deep water. The surface was calm, broken only by floating leaves and drifting branches. The man moved slowly, unaware that the ground beneath him sloped sharply into deeper water. The anaconda struck without warning. It surged upward from beneath the platform, wrapping around the man's torso and pulling him sideways into the submerged forest. The force dragged both beneath overhanging branches where roots and vines restricted movement further. The water churned violently. Other workers heard the disturbance but could not see its source. The flooded forest absorbed sound and motion, turning the struggle into a series of brief ripples that vanished almost immediately. By the time they reached the edge of the platform, the water was already calm again. The anaconda tightened its coils systematically. It anchored itself around multiple tree roots, using the submerged environment to counter any resistance. Each movement was deliberate, minimizing effort while cutting off breath and circulation. The dense underwater terrain prevented escape in any direction. Within minutes, the struggle ended. The anaconda remained submerged, holding position until all movement ceased. It then began to reposition, pulling its prey deeper into the flooded forest where the water was darker and more concealed. The body disappeared completely. Panic spread through the camp. The remaining workers attempted a brief search but were quickly overwhelmed by fear. Visibility was non-existent, and the water concealed countless hazards beyond the snake itself. Within an hour, they dismantled the camp and fled the area, abandoning equipment and supplies. Authorities were never officially notified. Illegal activity meant no formal report, no search operation, and no recovery. The incident entered local knowledge only through whispered accounts shared along river routes and at distant settlements. Weeks later, fishermen avoided the area entirely. Fish populations shifted, and large sections of the floodplain remained unnaturally quiet. Floating debris from the abandoned camp drifted downstream, eventually becoming lodged against riverbanks far from the site. Environmental researchers later identified the region as a high-risk zone. Flooded forests, they concluded, represent one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Predators such as anacondas are able to move three-dimensionally through water, vegetation, and submerged terrain, while humans are limited, visible, and vulnerable. The anaconda was never seen again, but its presence reshaped behavior across the region. Routes were altered, camps were relocated. Entire sections of river were left untouched, reclaimed by silence and slow-moving water. The flooded forest remains unchanged. Each rainy season, water rises, trees vanish beneath the surface, and the environment resets. What happened there left no permanent marks, no evidence visible above water. Only the ecosystem remembers. And beneath the surface, the apex predator continues to move unseen, perfectly adapted to a world where human survival is temporary and fragile.